Ethan had everything: money, power, success, and an endless list of people vying for his attention. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He was 32, sitting at the top of his game as a tech mogul, yet the allure of wealth had faded for him long ago. Life, for Ethan, had become a series of monotonous events: meetings, charity galas, business deals, and fleeting relationships. No matter how many people surrounded him, he felt entirely alone. One night, Ethan met his friends at an exclusive club, as they often did. It was the kind of place where the champagne flowed freely, and the glittering lights only added to the illusion of a perfect life. His friends, a rowdy group with more money than they could spend, were discussing their latest escapades, each one trying to outdo the last. Ethan, one of them, Jake, called out between sips of champagne, "You've got everything, except a woman who actually challenges you." Ethan chuckled. "What, you think I need some kind of challenge in my life? Everything's a challenge in my world." Jake raised an eyebrow. "No, no. Not the kind of challenge you're thinking of. A real one. Someone who doesn't care about your money. A woman who could keep up with you." The others laughed, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, right," Ethan said, rolling his eyes. "You know as well as I do that women like that don't exist." "Oh, I beg to differ," another friend, Chris, interjected. "I bet you can't find a woman who doesn't care about your money. I dare you to find one." Ethan leaned back, intrigued. He'd never been one to back down from a challenge, especially one that sounded so absurd. "You think so? How about this: find me a woman who doesn't care about my money, and I'll marry her." The table fell silent for a moment, then erupted into laughter. They all knew Ethan's life was built on wealth and power. Finding a woman who didn't care about those things seemed impossible. "Deal," Jake said, sealing the agreement with a smirk. The game was on. Ethan wasn't sure how it happened, but soon, he found himself walking the streets of the city with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. His friends had managed to track down someone who, at least on the surface, appeared to fit the bill: a homeless woman named Emma. She wasn't anything like the women he usually encountered in his high society circles. She didn't dress in designer clothes, didn't have a polished persona, and certainly didn't exude the same glamorous charm he was used to. Emma had been living on the streets for years, struggling to survive after a troubled past. Her life had taken a series of unfortunate turns, and now, she found herself with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken sense of hope. She wasn't looking for anything, especially not a man like Ethan. Yet, fate had a strange way of working itself out. Ethan, feeling a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, approached her one evening while she sat on the curb, wrapped in a worn-out blanket. He had been told that she would be there, that she was exactly who he needed to meet. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Ethan." She looked up at him, her eyes cold but not unfriendly. "What do you want?" He cleared his throat, not entirely sure how to start. "I'm looking for something different. Someone who doesn't care about money. I know that probably sounds ridiculous to you, but I need your help." Her gaze remained fixed on him, suspicion written on her face. "Help? From me?" she asked, a small laugh escaping her lips. "You're out of your mind, rich boy." Ethan paused, realizing that his usual charm wasn't going to work here. "I'm serious," he said, trying to match her tone. "I've been dared to find a woman who doesn't care about wealth. I didn't think I'd actually find one, but here you are." Emma raised an eyebrow, standing up from where she sat. "And what do you want me to do about it? You want me to play along with your little game?" Ethan's expression softened. "Look, I don't expect anything from you. I just need you to be yourself. No tricks, no pretense. Just you." For a long moment, Emma studied him, her face unreadable. She didn't trust him, but there was something oddly genuine in his eyes. Maybe it was the desperation, the sense of a man who had everything yet was still missing something. Maybe she saw through his confidence and recognized a vulnerability he was trying to hide. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it sounds like a waste of time to me," she said, but Ethan wasn't giving up that easily. "I'll pay you enough to get you off the streets. You can do whatever you want with the money. You don't owe me anything." That was all it took. The words, "get you off the streets," had an undeniable effect on Emma. For years, she had lived in fear and uncertainty, and the thought of escape, of a life that could be better, was something she couldn't ignore. Despite her misgivings, she agreed the next few days were a blur. Ethan arranged everything, a simple courthouse wedding with no frills, no drama. Just the two of them. To his surprise, Emma agreed to it without protest, though he could sense the tension in her every word and action. She was still unsure of what she was walking into, but she felt she had no choice. The wedding itself was brief, almost mechanical, and by the end of it, Ethan didn't feel any more connected to Emma than he had before. But there was a strange shift in him, something he couldn't quite place. As he looked at her during the ceremony, he noticed how unassuming she was, how grounded she seemed despite everything she had been through. For a moment, he almost forgot this was all just a game. When they returned to the hotel room, it hit him. The reality of the situation. This wasn't some casual fling. This wasn't some dare for laughs. Emma was now his wife, and there was an unfamiliar, unexpected responsibility attached to that. He watched her as she stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. She seemed so small in the vastness of the world. She had no family, no friends, no real home, only him. "You okay?" Ethan asked, though he wasn't sure he even knew how to ask the question. Emma turned to face him, her expression guarded but not cold. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Just a little overwhelmed." And so it began, an unconventional marriage, born out of a dare and fueled by a mix of curiosity and desperation. Ethan's life was about to change in ways he never anticipated, and Emma, despite her rough exterior, was about to face a world she had long since given up on. For both of them, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the wedding were strange. Ethan had always been in control of every situation, his life meticulously planned and executed. But with Emma, he felt as if he were floating in uncharted waters. The agreement between them was simple: she would play along with the marriage as long as she could escape her life on the streets, and he would fulfill his dare. But as the days turned into weeks, the lines between duty and desire began to blur. Ethan found himself thinking about Emma more than he expected. He had expected her to be a fleeting character in his life, someone who would quickly fade into the background once the dare was over. But she lingered in his thoughts, and he couldn't quite shake the sense that something deeper was beginning to grow between them. Emma, on the other hand, was conflicted. She had never known anything like this. She had lived on the streets for years, hardened by survival and trust issues, and now she was in a marriage with a man who had everything. At first, she kept her distance, not allowing herself to get too attached. She told herself it was just a temporary arrangement, that nothing about this could be real. But Ethan's kindness, his gentleness when no one was looking, was starting to chip away at the wall she had so carefully built around herself. They rarely spoke about the wedding or what it meant. It was as if the entire thing had happened in a dream. Every time Ethan tried to bring it up, Emma would deflect, offering a joke or changing the subject. But even without words, there was something palpable in the air between them, an unspoken tension that neither could ignore. One evening, after a long day of business meetings and social events, Ethan returned to the apartment he had set up for them. It wasn't much, just a small, modern place in a quiet corner of the city. It was far from the lavish penthouse he used to live in, but it was enough. It felt like a temporary home, like something neither of them truly belonged to yet. Emma was sitting on the couch, her legs curled up underneath her, reading a book. She looked so at peace in this little sanctuary, a stark contrast to the raw energy she exuded on the streets. Ethan couldn't help but notice how much she had changed in the short time they'd been married. She looked healthier, more vibrant, and, dare he admit it, more beautiful than he had initially realized. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment before speaking. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "I know this is all weird." Emma didn't look up from the book, but she could sense his hesitation. She had been feeling it too, this undercurrent of unspoken emotions that neither of them had the courage to address. "It's fine," she said, her voice steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her words. "I'm not exactly sure what to think either." Ethan stepped closer, leaning against the back of the couch. "I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect you. I didn't think I'd be affected by you." Emma finally looked up, meeting his eyes. There was a pause, the air thick with a mixture of tension and something else, something neither of them had quite named yet. "I didn't think you'd be affected by me either," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what this is. I didn't expect to care about you. This was supposed to be a game, a joke. But now," Emma's eyes softened. "Now you're wondering if it's real." It wasn't a question. She knew, because she was wondering the same thing. Had they both been fooling themselves? Was this truly just about a dare, or was something deeper starting to grow? Neither of them spoke for a while, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. Finally, Ethan sat down beside her, his gaze not meeting hers, but focused on the floor. "I didn't expect to feel this way. You've changed things for me. You're different. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Emma swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She had never been the type to let herself be vulnerable, but she couldn't deny the growing feelings inside her. Ethan, despite his wealth and arrogance, had a vulnerability about him that spoke to something inside her. Maybe it was because, in his own way, he was as lost as she was. "I don't know what to do with this either," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared, Ethan. I don't want to believe that this is real, because nothing in my life ever has been. But I also don't want to keep pretending like I don't feel something." Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "What do you feel?" Her breath hitched in her throat as she answered, "I feel like I'm finally waking up from a dream. A dream where I'm someone I never thought I could be. Where I'm not just someone who's been left behind." Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was light, tentative, as if they were both afraid of what it might mean. "I don't want to hurt you, Emma. I know I've been distant. I didn't mean to be. But I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out what this, us, is." Emma's heart skipped a beat, her breath coming a little quicker. She had never been the type to let anyone get close, especially a man like Ethan. But in this moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let herself be vulnerable. Ready to let herself believe in something more. She turned her hand over, letting her palm rest against his. Their fingers intertwined, and it felt natural, like a missing piece falling into place. For the first time since they'd met, it wasn't about the dare, or the money, or the circumstances that had brought them together. It was about the simple connection between them. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving his. "But I don't want to keep running from this." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then let's not." The moment was fragile, but it was real. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, but in that brief silence, they both understood something. This wasn't just about a game anymore. This wasn't about proving something to anyone. It was about discovering something new, something that neither of them had ever expected. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a spark of hope. And Emma? She wasn't sure where she was heading, but she knew she wasn't walking alone anymore. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics between Ethan and Emma began to shift in subtle yet significant ways. The contract of their strange marriage, once an arrangement born of a dare, was no longer just a game. It had become something neither of them had expected. Though neither was willing to admit it, a bond was forming, one that went beyond the surface of their arrangement. For Emma, the days that followed were a mixture of uncertainty and discovery. She had grown up learning to shield her heart from the world, to trust no one, not even herself. Life on the streets had left her jaded, her sense of self-worth frayed by years of struggle. She had learned to survive without attachment, because attachment only led to disappointment, but Ethan, in his own way, was different. He had a warmth about him that she hadn't expected. Beneath the wealth, the power, and the polished exterior, there was a tenderness that she couldn't ignore. Slowly, imperceptibly, she began to let down the walls she had spent so long building around herself. She found herself laughing at his jokes, looking forward to their conversations, and even, unbelievably, enjoying his company, but still, there was a part of her that remained cautious, unsure of what was happening. Was this truly real, or was it just another illusion that would eventually shatter? She couldn't afford to believe that this was anything more than an arrangement. Ethan, on the other hand, was in a state of internal conflict. He had lived a life of privilege, surrounded by luxury, but never had he experienced anything like this. With Emma, he didn't feel the need to be anyone other than who he was. There was no pretense, no game. She saw through his wealth, his status, and treated him like any other person, neither impressed nor intimidated. That alone was something he had never experienced before. It was confusing for him, because he found himself wanting to know more about her, her thoughts, her past, her hopes and fears. But whenever he tried to dig deeper, Emma would shut down, retreating into her shell. He could feel her walls, just as strongly as she could feel his. But despite the distance she kept, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when she allowed herself to show a glimpse of vulnerability. And in those moments, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deeper connection to her, a pull that he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner, Ethan found himself in his study, trying to focus on work. He should have been finalizing a major business deal, but his mind kept drifting back to Emma. The way she had laughed at his dry humor that morning, the way her eyes softened when she thought he wasn't looking. It was as if he was learning a different side of her every day, one layer at a time. He looked up from his laptop as Emma walked into the room, her presence gentle but unmistakable. She was wearing a simple pair of jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She didn't seem like the same woman who had walked into his life weeks ago, the homeless woman struggling to survive. She looked more comfortable. More at ease. "Hey," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "I was thinking of going for a walk. Do you want to join me?" Ethan closed his laptop and stood up, surprised at the invitation. He had always known Emma preferred her solitude, but lately, she had been more open, more willing to engage. "Sure," he said, offering her a warm smile. "I'd love to." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city streets were quiet, the only sound being the soft echo of their footsteps as they walked side by side. There was no agenda, no pressure, just two people in the stillness of the night. As they walked, Emma spoke more than usual, sharing little tidbits of her life before the streets, memories of her family, her childhood, the things that once made her feel safe. Ethan listened intently, asking questions but never pushing too hard. For the first time, Emma seemed to be opening up, allowing herself to remember the good parts of her past. Ethan was surprised by how much he wanted to know, how much he cared about the things she shared. He had never considered himself someone who needed to hear people's stories. But with Emma, her past felt like a piece of the puzzle that had been missing in their strange relationship. "Do you ever think about going back?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle. "To your old life, I mean." Emma paused, looking up at the sky as if searching for an answer in the stars. Sometimes, she said quietly. But I don't know if there's anything left for me. The world I knew, it doesn't exist anymore. People change. Things change. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to reach out, to offer her something more, but he wasn't sure what. He wasn't even sure if he had the right to. He had no idea what it was like to struggle the way she had, to lose everything. I get that, he said after a moment. Sometimes I think I've lost myself in all of this too. The work, the money, the image I've built, it's all so empty sometimes. Emma looked at him then, really looked at him. Her eyes were soft, understanding. I don't think you're empty, Ethan, she said quietly. You've just forgotten who you really are. His heart skipped a beat at her words. It was something he had been trying to ignore for so long, this sense of disconnection he felt from the life he had built. But hearing it from her, someone who had nothing, made him realize how much he had been running from. The conversation ended there, neither of them knowing how to go further. But as they continued their walk, Ethan felt the weight of her words, and a sense of clarity began to settle over him. The following day, Ethan found himself once again watching Emma from a distance as she moved around their apartment. There was a peacefulness about her now that hadn't been there before, like she had finally found her place, even if she didn't quite realize it yet. He had been trying to suppress his feelings, trying to convince himself that this was all just a temporary arrangement. But the truth was, he cared about Emma. In ways he didn't understand, and in ways that terrified him, he cared deeply. That night, after dinner, he finally gathered the courage to ask her a question that had been weighing on his mind for days. Emma, he said softly, what if this isn't just a game? Emma looked up from the book she was reading, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? She asked. I mean, Ethan hesitated, his heart racing. I mean, what if this is real? What if we're not just pretending anymore? What if we're something more than just a marriage for a dare? For the first time in their strange marriage, Emma didn't immediately shut down. Instead, she set the book aside and looked at him, her gaze thoughtful. I don't know, she said quietly. I don't know what this is. But I'm starting to think that maybe I don't need to know right now. And in that moment, Ethan realized that neither of them needed to have all the answers. Maybe they weren't ready to define what this was yet, but it didn't matter. Because what they had was real, whatever it was, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Weeks passed, and Ethan and Emma found themselves increasingly entangled in a delicate dance. The lines between their arrangement and something more significant blurred as their time together deepened. What had started as a dare, a game to satisfy a challenge, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Both were starting to question what had brought them to this point. Was it fate, or something else entirely? For Emma, the situation was confusing. She had lived her entire life on her own terms, surviving in a world where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, she found herself in a marriage that was supposed to be nothing more than a temporary arrangement, and yet, every day with Ethan made her rethink everything she thought she knew about relationships. Ethan, for his part, was equally conflicted. He had entered this with the intention of fulfilling a dare, but now, his feelings for Emma had shifted in a way that unsettled him. He had spent so much of his life maintaining control, managing every detail of his world with precision. But with Emma, he felt a loss of control, something unpredictable, something raw, pulling him deeper into the emotions he had long buried. One evening, as they shared dinner at the apartment, the tension between them was palpable. Emma, usually so quick with her words, was quiet tonight, her gaze distant as she poked at her food. Ethan watched her carefully, his mind racing. He could feel the distance between them widening, though neither of them had acknowledged it. There were things left unsaid, emotions unspoken. Emma, Ethan began, his voice breaking the silence. What's going on? You've been distant lately. She looked up at him, her eyes guarded. I'm fine. He leaned forward, his expression softening. You haven't been fine. You've been pulling away. Is it me? Did I do something wrong? Emma hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. It's not you. It's just, this situation, Ethan. Everything is moving too fast. I don't know what's real anymore. Ethan sat back in his chair, his heart aching as he tried to understand. What do you mean by real? We're real. This, whatever this is, it's real. I'm not pretending. I don't know about you, but this, what we have, feels real to me. Her gaze flickered to him, her lips pressed into a tight line. It's real, all right. But I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending like I'm okay with everything. Ethan frowned, his frustration building. Pretending? I'm not pretending, Emma. What do you want from me? You've been closed off for weeks now. I don't know how to fix this if you won't tell me what's wrong. Emma stood abruptly, pushing her chair back. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm just telling you that I'm struggling with this. This isn't just a game anymore, Ethan. You want me to act like everything's fine, but it's not. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to trust you. The words hit Ethan harder than he anticipated. His mind raced to make sense of what she was saying. Trust? Is that what this is about? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. You don't get it, Ethan. I've been let down my entire life. I can't just throw myself into this, into you, without knowing that you're not just going to walk away when things get tough. You say this is real, but I can't believe that unless you show me. I can't keep giving myself to something that feels like it's going to disappear the moment I trust it. Ethan stood and walked over to her, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about the dare anymore, this was about something deeper, something raw that neither of them had prepared for. I'm not going anywhere, Emma, he said, his voice low. I'm here. I don't know what this is between us, but I'm not going anywhere. Emma swallowed hard, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and longing. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this wasn't just another temporary arrangement, that she wasn't just a pawn in his life. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't real, that it was all a lie waiting to fall apart. I can't keep doing this, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know how to trust you. How do you expect me to? You're a millionaire. You have everything I've never had, and I'm just some girl who came from nothing. How do I trust someone like you? Ethan's heart shattered at her words. He had never considered the vast divide between their worlds, how different their lives had been. But in that moment, he realized how much he had taken for granted. He had assumed that because of his wealth, his status, and his charm, Emma would simply accept him. But Emma wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't impressed by his money or his power. She wanted something real. I don't care about any of that, Ethan said quietly, his voice full of conviction. I don't care about how much money I have or where I came from. All I care about is you. And I don't want to lose you, Emma. I'll prove to you that I'm not going anywhere. That I'm here for you, no matter what. The words hung between them, heavy and filled with meaning. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Emma's mind was racing, caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself trust him, to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. But the scars of her past were deep, and trusting someone, truly trusting them, was something she wasn't sure she could ever do. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. But I want to try. I want to believe in this. In us. Ethan stepped forward, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "Then let's do it together. One step at a time." Emma nodded slowly, her heart still heavy with doubt but also with a flicker of hope. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable before. But something in Ethan's eyes, the sincerity in his words, made her think that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different, and so, with those fragile words hanging between them, they both made a silent promise to give this a chance. To trust each other, despite the fears and uncertainties that threatened to tear them apart. The next few days were filled with moments of quiet reflection and tentative steps forward. They spent time together, but the shadows of their doubts lingered. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. And though they both wanted to believe in something real, they knew it wouldn't be easy, but something had shifted between them. They were no longer pretending, no longer hiding behind the facade of a marriage that was supposed to be a joke. They were standing on the edge of something bigger, something uncertain, but real, and as Ethan lay in bed that night, his thoughts on Emma and the challenges ahead, he realized that whatever happened, whatever came next, he wouldn't let her go. He was in this for the long haul. The days that followed the heart-to-heart conversation between Ethan and Emma were filled with an uneasy but palpable shift. The air between them was different, charged with the kind of tension that came from opening up, from revealing parts of themselves they had long buried. Though they had made a silent pact to give their strange marriage a chance, neither of them had fully understood just how difficult it would be to bridge the gap between who they were and who they wanted to be. Ethan found himself waking up each morning with a deep, almost insistent longing to prove himself, to Emma, and perhaps to himself. He knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just about their marriage or the dare anymore, it was about something deeper, something real. And yet, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was on shaky ground. The walls Emma had built around her heart were high, and though she had shown him cracks in those walls, she still hesitated to fully let him in. For Emma, each day felt like a delicate balancing act. She had never been one to let anyone get too close. The streets had taught her the painful lesson of relying only on herself. No one else had ever shown up for her, not in the ways she needed. She had learned to distrust kindness, and for her, trust wasn't something that came easily. It had to be earned, and even then, there were no guarantees. Still, there was something about Ethan, something that made her think maybe, just maybe, he was different, but her heart remained guarded. No matter how much she wanted to believe in him, in them, a part of her feared that it was all too good to be true. She couldn't ignore the voice in her head that told her that sooner or later, Ethan would leave, just like everyone else had. One evening, as the sun set and the city around them buzzed with life, Ethan invited Emma to join him for dinner at one of his favorite spots. It was a high-end restaurant, the kind that catered to the elite, where everyone knew him by name. Emma had hesitated, the thought of stepping into that world feeling strange to her. But Ethan had insisted, offering her a chance to experience a part of his life that she had never seen. She agreed, but only under the condition that they would keep it casual. The days that followed the conversation where Emma admitted her fear of trusting Ethan were filled with an overwhelming mix of tension, hope, and uncertainty. Despite the quiet promise she had made to herself and to him, Emma still struggled to let go of her reservations. Her walls remained high, but there were moments, small moments, when she felt herself softening, when she could see the possibility of something real. Ethan, too, found himself caught between his desire to have Emma in his life and the growing realization that love couldn't be forced. He had spent most of his life in control, able to dictate his path, but with Emma, he had no control. Her heart, fragile as it was, needed time to heal, and no amount of persuasion on his part would change that. He had to be patient, something he had never been before. One evening, after a long week of quiet moments, conversations, and distance, Ethan came home to find Emma sitting by the window, gazing out at the city lights. Her posture was tense, her body turned away from him as if she were lost in thought, or perhaps lost to herself. He stood silently for a moment, watching her, unsure of how to approach. But then, as if drawn to her, he walked across the room and gently touched her shoulder. she didn't flinch, didn't pull away, but instead turned slowly to face him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't read. The silence between them spoke volumes, louder than any words could. "I'm sorry," Emma said, her voice small, her vulnerability laid bare. "I've been pushing you away, and I know it. I just don't know how to let you in. I don't know how to let anyone in." Ethan's heart ached for her. He had never fully understood the depth of her pain, the scars that shaped her into the person she had become. She was so strong on the outside, so guarded, but beneath it all was someone who had been hurt too many times to count, someone who had learned to protect herself from the world's cruelty. "You don't have to apologize," Ethan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking for you to change overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere." Emma's eyes searched his face, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the truth of his words. She felt the sincerity in them, deep in her bones. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that this was real. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared to let you in, because I don't know if I can handle losing you." Ethan's hand moved to gently cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was soft, but it was filled with a quiet intensity, a promise that he wasn't going to let go of her, not now, not ever. "You don't have to handle anything alone anymore," he said, his words firm but filled with tenderness. "We'll figure this out together. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not for anything." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma let herself close the distance between them. She leaned into his touch, her breath catching as she allowed herself to feel the weight of his presence, his warmth, his strength, and his commitment. It was a quiet surrender, the kind she had never experienced before. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to just feel. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to be herself, and that was enough. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if to reassure both of them that they could face whatever came next. There were no more games, no more walls. Just two people, flawed and scarred, but willing to give each other a chance. "I trust you," Emma whispered, her voice trembling as she spoke the words she had never been able to say before. "I trust you, Ethan." It was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when everything fell into place. He kissed her then, his lips meeting hers with the tenderness of someone who had waited for this moment, someone who had never truly known the meaning of patience until now. Their kiss was slow, gentle, full of the unspoken emotions that had been building between them for weeks, and for the first time, Emma allowed herself to fully embrace the kiss, to let go of her doubts and fears. She had spent so much of her life protecting her heart, but now she was learning to trust it again. Learning to trust him. To trust them. As the kiss deepened, they both knew that this wasn't the end of their journey. There would be more challenges ahead, more doubts, more fears to overcome, but they had made it this far. And as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything together. Hours later, as they lay in bed together, Emma curled against Ethan, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, she finally allowed herself to relax. She had never felt so safe, so at peace. The uncertainty that had once consumed her had melted away, replaced by the warmth of something far more comforting: love. True love, not the kind that was built on wealth or status, but the kind that was built on trust, understanding, and the willingness to give each other a chance. Ethan stroked her hair, his fingers tracing the soft strands as he whispered, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're here, together." Emma smiled softly, her eyes fluttering closed. "Me too." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside and the warmth of their shared space, they both knew that no matter where life took them, they had found something real. Something that neither of them had expected, but both had longed for. Their story wasn't a perfect one, nor was it without its scars. But it was theirs, and that was all that mattered.